and that was kind of that. Oh, wait.
It's alive! It's alive! It's alive! It's alive!
You can't win that game.
Tic tac toe.
And a jolly good day to you, Marcel.
And a jolly good day to you as well. So you're drinking coffee and I'm drinking green tea.
Yeah.
And actually, you set me up for far worse than than what I'm seeing here. How you doing anyway?
Not bad, not bad. As usual, keeping busy is never a problem.
No,
I have a couple of things that I'm working on, a lot of which have absolutely nothing to do with the old worlds of open source and community development.
Mm-hmm.
It's kind of weird because you and I are no spring chickens anymore, and there are a lot.
Your tongue, you monster.
Okay, summer chickens.
Everyone
talks about spring chickens. No one talks about summer or fall chickens.
I think that's because that's when they get eaten. I don't know. Sorry, please continue. All right, I accept I'm not a spring chicken. Go ahead. Continue.
No, but one thing I noticed that there's a lot of new open source projects that are starting up, and they all now come to not just sort of, they don't seem like they're grassroots anymore. It's not a bunch of people that get together and say, hey, let's make something. Mm-hmm. It ends up being like some higher order entity that says something needs to be done. Let's see if we can find some volunteers to help. And I'm finding there's a lot more top down than bottom up these days. Mm-hmm. And it just seems to be affecting the culture of a number of open source communities these days. I don't know. Are you finding that?
Well, no, actually, I've been finding that for a long time, and in fact, I think I've whined to you about that to some degree from time to time, which is the idea that once upon a time when I first got involved in open source, which okay, so I'm not a spring chicken, which was a gazillion years ago now. It was fun. It was actually a hell of a lot of fun. There were all sorts of neat things happening. There were cool projects that people were working on. And just the excitement that revolved around some of these projects, and whether it's the Linux, various desktops, Apache web services, you name it, whatever projects it is that people were working on. It was all new. It was very exciting, and you could wrap up people from any and all walks of life to be part of this community and contribute to it and be part of it. And it was kind of heady, actually. It was kind of neat to feel that, everybody, they didn't have to be corporate to be involved in this thing. It just had to be people who were into the idea of the technology and where the technology could take us. And that was very freeing, and it was very exciting. And then somewhere along the way, everything became corporate, and it all came down to, well, can we make money at this? Can I get a job doing this? And in fact, I whined about this in a column for a dear departed organization that we used to work with. Where I said. If you're going to get a job in open source, perhaps you should consider doing it for the right reasons, the open part of open source, as opposed to, this is where the money is these days, or this is where I can get a job these days. There's nothing wrong with it. I mean, everybody has to feed themselves, has to put clothes on their backs, a roof over their heads, all that sort of stuff. But that doesn't mean that has to be the whole driver of what you're doing. And so open source became, if you'll pardon the expression, boring. There weren't any communities per se. I'm not saying there weren't any, but the communities were, gray-haired guys like, well, me, you don't have gray hair, but, gray-haired guys like us who, remember the days when we were doing all these cool and wonderful things. One of the Linux user groups, where you still got small numbers of hanger-ons who continue to meet on a monthly basis, hoping for something new and exciting to happen. And I'm not saying I'm not blaming people for a nostalgia trip there, but it felt like we were changing the world at one time.
Well,
And now it just
we were
feels
doing
like we're
things like,
working for the man.
well, no, we were changing the world. We were doing things like install FOSS, bring in your computer, we'll make it useful again.
Yeah.
You know, and that kind of thing. Absolutely, the energy was there, and you're right. It's, you know, on one hand, where you say, "Where's the money?" People are looking for jobs, but you're right. It's not the it's you're not there always because you want to be there and because you think you're changing the world. Now you're there because you think you're changing the world for some entity that now owns the license and IP to what's going on, and we'll have a freemium model, and you know, here's the open source version and here's the open source plus version that you have to subscribe to.
Yeah, I mean, there was this idea that, you know, we build things, we make exciting things, and maybe the money comes, maybe it doesn't. It doesn't matter. That's not the point of it. And now that is the point of it. You know, I mean, you think for a moment, who are the biggest? Now, I grant you, we're living in a world of, you know, tech layoffs and so forth, but the Linux kernel, you know, the heart of, you know, when things all got, you know, super exciting back in 1991. Who's the biggest contributor to the Linux kernel today?
Would not surprise me if it was like Intel and Microsoft.
It's Microsoft. IBM was the biggest contributor at one point. Now it's Microsoft. So I mean, so you've got Microsoft and, you know, and IBM, and I don't know what, I mean, Intel was a big contributor at one point. I don't know what their numbers are these days. I have to be perfectly honest, I haven't looked in a while, but it's the big corporate heads that are driving all this stuff. And it's not that I'm I'm bothered by this, you know, because in a way, you know, we won. I say this regularly, you know, the
Mhm.
open source movement won. The stuff that's out there that's being used, that's really driving the industry is the stuff that, you know, and we, and I'm not saying you and me specifically, but, you know, the open source community created this stuff, right? That's where it came out of. So we've won, but in having won, you know, it's like the hippies in the 60s, you know, who found out that they were part of, you know, they were fighting against the man, and then 20 years later looked in the mirror and said, oh my God, I am the man.
Yeah. And so I've always had a minor personal fear what happens when Linus retires,
Yeah.
because he's been so respected. He's been able to pull off the benevolent dictator because he's Linus. And so when he retires, whoever fills those shoes is not going to have that gravitas. And in the absence of that gravitas, in the absence of that benevolent dictatorship, uh, even if it becomes a committee, it's going to become a committee of the Intels and the Microsofts, and whoever it is can afford to pay people full time to work on this stuff. And that really kind of limits it. And I wonder what, there's a part of me that fears, and it may be totally unjustified, but you know, that there's going to be a corporate direction for Linux going forward that may spur a whole bunch of people to say, no, we're going to keep it free, and there might be a split. I almost see it as a kind of, you know, Red Hat CentOS kind of thing, where there's going to be one that's corporatized and one that's not.
Yeah, I don't actually, I don't doubt that in a big way, but I also don't know that it hasn't already happened. And I mean, the reason I say that is there are a lot of companies that, you know, produce a Linux where, sure, the source is available if you have the resources and the know-how and everything to repackage it and create something on your own. Because I mean, that's at the heart of the GPL, for instance, right? You have to release the code back into the community. But there are very, very few people out there, or very few groups for that matter, who have the resources necessary to create and maintain, you know, a sizable distribution that would fit a sizable marketplace. So in a sense, you know, if you sign up for Red Hat, you're paying for it. If you sign up for Canonicals, Ubuntu, you know, and I'm talking corporate level here, obviously, you're paying for it. You're paying for all of these things. And it doesn't matter that somewhere at the core, the code is available in the open source community. The fact of the matter is, it's still a corporate entity.
Yeah, and then the proportion of the user base that's actually able to examine the code and fork it and do that kind of thing is probably not very big. And it's not even all just the paid stuff. So for instance, even if you have good old, a bog standard Ubuntu now, it's depending a lot on these things called snaps.
Yeah.
Right. For
Those are going away though, aren't they? I thought they were abandoning snaps in favor of Flatpak.
Oh, is Ubuntu done that? Okay.
Yeah, I think let me Google it here while you talk and see if I.
Well, actually, we can save this discussion for another day, because since we last recorded, there's been a few things happening in the world of AI, and given how deep you are in this, I figured maybe there's a couple of new things that have happened and new things that have come online and new packages available that deal with this thing called AI. Marcel, do you have any background in this?
This just for the benefit of the people who want to know why Evan is wording this in that fashion. Offline or on our Discord server, or my Discord server, how you want to look at it, we've chatted more than once about the potential risks, the dark side versus the light side. So it's like the force. You've got the light side of the force and the dark side of the force in AI. I'm firmly in the belief that the light side is the good side and the side that will win out in all of this. And I think a lot of the reason that I feel that way, a lot of the reason that I believe that way is I am, and I'll get into this in a minute, but I am starting to feel the kind of excitement around AI development, particularly in the cases of, things like large language models, AI image generation, all these sorts of things that aren't tied 100% to some giant corporate machine. I'm not saying there isn't a giant corporate machine out there, but I'm starting to see a kind of early open source community excitement building around this stuff that is really, really capturing my imagination. That's really getting me excited. And for anybody who's been living under a rock, of course, the big news was back at the end of November when OpenAI released ChatGPT, which quickly became the most popular application, a computer application in history. I think the number was, it reached 100 million active users in less than 2 months, which is bigger than anything that's ever come before. So this is like a massively rapid takeoff. And to quote or to summon or to channel Ray Kurzweil a little bit here, the singularity is getting nearer by the minute.
Okay, the singularity. And previous to that, the closest I'd come to it was this thing called Minecraft, which was an attempt to try and turn a Raspberry Pi into a Google Assistant.
Yes, or an Alexa or whatever.
And it never, and to have the leap from that to what we have now is absolutely staggering. And by the way, the reason why Marcel thinks I'm talked about the dark side is because I'm the one that sort of says, whoa, boy, put some reins on that. Things are moving way too fast for a lot of people. There's a lot of problems going on in society that I think are at their core because society moves at glacial speed and things are happening too fast.
That's my point. I say this all the time.
But this is writ larger than tech. When you go into issues right now about trans rights, and you go into other issues about about why politics has become so weaponized in many parts of the world. A lot of it, I think, is that there's many parts of technology, diversity, and others that big chunks of society just are not having an easy time catching up to. And you see social disruption happening in places that have nothing to do with tech because society isn't catching up, can't catch up fast enough. The legal system can't catch up fast enough. All sorts of things. And and where I sometimes feel like I'm putting the reins on Marcel about this is not because I'm trying to be a glass half empty kind of guy. I love what's happening. It's just there's some things where if the AI world doesn't figure out for itself what the negative sides are and think about how to address them, when society comes up with its remedies, they're probably not going to be either effective, but the question then is how much damage do they do along the way? And so this is I guess my issue. There's a phenomenal amount of good, but are we prepared for how to deal with, for instance, the fields of work where people are going to be potentially um, put out of work almost en masse on certain job types because chat will do it so much better than they will. And there's articles that I've seen in the Economist and elsewhere where they talk about the jobs that are most likely and least likely to be replaced by AI. So if you're in furniture repair, you've got it made. AI ain't replacing furniture repair anytime soon.
Or if you're a plumber.
Well, a lot of the hands-on stuff, of course. But I mean, there's even a couple of mental things. But if your work is an interpreter or a translator, you're screwed.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a lot of other fields that are going to be first off the chopping block. And I don't know if society in its current state, bashed and battered by COVID and all sorts of other factors, how well it's going to be able to adapt to what could be a very significant disruption.
All right, I'm going to take that in a few steps, okay? The first thing that I want to sort of, and there are a lot of things you've just thrown in there. One of them is the kind of disruption that you're talking about from an economic, personal economic, global economic perspective is, I'm sorry to say, inevitable. It has been inevitable for a long time. Okay. Since we started out talking about chickens, let's just say that the chickens are coming home to roost. See what I did there?
Spring or any season, yes.
Yes. Anyway, the point is, this has been going on for a long time. It has been coming for a long time. It's like the slow-moving disaster of climate change, okay? We're the freaking frogs sitting in the water the temperature is slowly rising and we're getting cooked, okay? Nobody's really noticing. We kind of need, and maybe I'm oversimplifying this, but we kind of need a major shakeup because the minor shakeups are not actually doing anything to anybody. As you remarked, and as I've remarked countless times, I'm frustrated by the glacial pace at which governments move, organizations move, and so forth, and they still think that they're living 150 years ago instead of in the world that we inhabit today. There are countless things that need to happen right freaking now. We can't slowly move these people over the next 100 years into some of these things. We can't slowly move industry into green, into 100% green energy over the course of the next 200 years. It's got to happen like fast. Okay, we have to get on these things right now. And unfortunately, in the case of technology replacing people, that was going to happen anyway. It's been happening for a long time. It was going to happen. So what we need is not to put the brakes on things. It's to come up with a solution that's going to take care of people. And I know that this is one of my soapboxes, but we desperately need a universal basic income. Okay, so that people aren't starting at zero, so that people have the resources necessary to feed themselves, to clothe themselves, to put a roof over their heads, and then we'll deal with all the other problems that come along as well. But that has to happen because nothing is going to stop all these other things by saying, let's take it slow and easy. Climate change isn't going to stop by taking things slow and easy. The rights of marginalized people aren't going to get any better by taking things slow and easy. There are things that need to be taken care of now. And one of the reasons that I'm excited about artificial intelligence is it is giving us a toolkit that we haven't had before, a toolkit to create solutions, to create things at a speed that we've never had at our disposal before. And I know that's scary. I know it is, but we've been given superpowers. I wrote a blog post about this, a couple of weeks ago or something. What are you going to do with your new AI superpowers? We've been given superpowers. We've been given the ability to think about things and create things in a way that we've never had before. And this is where I get excited about the whole open source part of it. Everybody is getting involved in this. Like, the bar to entry is sitting down in front of ChatGPT or inside one of these generative AI things and making stuff. And everybody can sit down in front of a terminal, in front of a computer, and make things now. And
that is both extremely good and extremely horrifying. Because if I think of all the people that were able to mislead well-meaning folks into buying useless cyber coins and stuff like that, and people that are really good at defrauding others under current circumstances, and now have superpowers to help them do that. And so, yes, superpowers can be a great thing. Unfortunately, one of my favorite shows these days happens to be something called The Boys, that does not paint superpowers in the most positive picture you could think of.
Yeah, but that's because the superpowers are in the hands of a few people. Okay. What I'm looking at is I'm looking at a world where everybody has superpowers. Okay. And that's one of the reasons, again, I know I bring up universal basic income to you on a regular basis, but that's one of the things. I mean, the reason that people fall for a lot of this crap is because they're desperate. Okay. People are seeing their opportunities disappearing. They're seeing more powerful people than them. They're living in fear of what's coming next. So what you do is you get rid of most of that fear up front. Okay. You're going to have enough to eat. You're going to have enough to put clothes on your back. You're going to have enough to live. Okay. Let's move on to the next problem. My son, one of my sons is likes to point out, the solutions that people overlook that seem horribly simple. Like, for instance, in Norway, the problem of homelessness basically doesn't exist, and the reason it basically doesn't exist is they provided housing for people. Oh my God! what an amazingly simple solution. I realize it involves money, it involves determination, it involves government, it involves political will, but that doesn't mean the solutions don't exist. And sometimes you got to drag people kicking and screaming into the solutions. Sorry, you desperately.
Well, no. The problem is this kind of argument cries out for a devil's advocate, and the last thing I want to do is be that advocate.
Please be that advocate. I have a great deal of respect for the devil.
Well, just in the sense that arguably what Norway is able to do, it does because there's other countries that are being innovative on its behalf. Right? It's able to piggyback on innovations and things that are done in societies that are far less equal. Now, would I love Canada to do the same thing, or the US, or elsewhere in the EU? But Scandinavia is massively heavily taxed. And so there's a lot of what libertarians would call wealth transfer, forced wealth transfer. Personally, I'm not particularly against that. Again, though, there's a lot of entrenched interests that are going to fight that tooth and nail. But I want to get back to something you said about, when everyone has superpowers. And the first the parallel people don't want to draw is what's happening in the US, where you have some politicians is, how do you deal with bad guys with guns? Well, by putting the guns in the hands of every good guy that's out there too, which basically means even more people get shot. Now,
except that AI isn't a gun.
But hold on. I'll give you an example of somewhere where I think that this kinds of AI arms race is already happening, which is in the field of education. Right? So you basically have AI that is now helping students write term papers and essays in a way that perhaps allow people to present a paper that doesn't demonstrate their personal grasp of the subject matter. And so you have the academic world that's pulling its hair out, trying to figure out, well, how do we deal with this? And so there's now all sorts of AI bots that'll say, we'll tell you when a term paper or an essay is written by an AI and when it's not. Except, as you probably know, those things don't have a very good track record of picking
No,
up.
and in fact, I personally sent you a story about this, which somebody went and put the U.S. Constitution through one of these AI checkers, and it came out as being 100% AI written. And in fact, the Bible, the King James Version of the Bible, came out at 97.5% written by an AI, which to me fully supports the simulation theory that we're living in a computer simulation, because obviously all of this stuff was created by AIs before we came along.
Or
Okay,
the AI that belonged to the aliens that came here to bring it.
that's right. Exactly. No, I'm sorry. I realize I'm joking, but if ancient texts, because they're not written in a language that's that's I don't know casual, you know, is flagged as being 100% or nearly 100% written by an AI, that tells me that those things are basically shit. Yeah.
Right. But going back to this whole thing of this arms race between
Yes. Sorry.
students
Yes.
with
Yes.
AI and teachers with AI, right? So you have students that are writing their essays with AI. They don't know stuff. They're just feeding prompt. Their best skill right now is being able to design a prompt. And they're going in and they've got this stuff. Meanwhile, the professors are armoring themselves with AI that is problematic in its accuracy
Mhm.
of whether or not they're going to spot it or now. How does the field of education cope with this? Because it's definitely not producing teachers that are evaluating their students or students that are demonstrating their knowledge. And this to me requires an utter rethink. And it basically means that in order to actually find out if a student knows what they're talking about, you have to ask them.
Mhm.
We may have to go back to where, professors and or, their helpers are actually interviewing their students, looking them in the eye, asking them questions without a device in their hand and
Mhm.
getting an idea whether they know the subject matter. And that's more work for the academics. It's much more work for the academics. They can't be as lazy as they have been so far. But it also has the ability to actually produce a much better cadre of students that know what they're doing. Because I mean, I've had problems for a long time now with academia, especially in humanities and social sciences, where students are just churning out all these essays and papers that no one will ever read past their initial presentation. And that just churn out the same stuff. And we're not really churning out a generation that actually has the ability to act on any of the problems they identify. Everyone's just re-identifying the same problems without, and coming up with super simplistic solutions, and perhaps dispensing with this whole thing of writing essays and actually getting into interviews so that the students demonstrate they know what they're talking about may actually produce us a better category of students, a better quality of students that come out of these.
You
Um,
know, I, I've I've also had issues with the educational system basically my whole life. One of the things that I think the idea of just regurgitating something doesn't actually prove much. I mean, if you can cram for an exam, for instance, the night before, and then you get a really decent score, and then I ask you 2 weeks later about what it is that you wrote something and you don't remember a damn thing, I question how much you've actually learned or how much, what you've actually shown by the fact that you were able to cram and write this essay the night before. Like, to me, that's more a question. It's more an endurance thing at that point. Show me that you have the endurance necessary, or the I don't know, or the focus necessary to be able to prepare for this one event, which we will then forget about for the rest of your life. And there's something that sort of bothers me about that, and has always bothered me about that. Now, in some schools, including some of my son's teachers, okay, they've actually embraced the fact that ChatGPT is out there and available for their students. So they've said up front, I'm okay with you using these tools. I want to see where you started with these tools, where you took them. I want to know which parts you did, which parts they did. And I think what it does at that point is it sort of breaks down the desire to cheat 100%. Because a lot of the, like, you're a writer, I'm a writer, you know the frustration of looking at a blank page or looking at a project where you're just starting. It's mind-numbing sometimes. Writer's block is not for lack of ideas. Ideas are a dime a freaking dozen, right? The problem is, oh my God, I have this big project I need to get working on. Sometimes, and the solution is always, you got to get started, And I think what Chat GPT and what things like that do is they get you started. Okay. Not to mention that they make it possible for you to look at things differently. Okay. You mentioned prompt engineering, just as we're developing a cadre of prompt engineers. I think
I see this as being the next big thing. Now that we've exhausted the whole thing about SEO generation and SEO experts, and we'll give you all the best keywords and stuff.
Good riddance.
But do you not see that being replaced with a whole army of fly-by-night? I'll help you write GPT prompts.
Okay, first of all, I just want to point out how insanely new all of this is. Okay, like, it is the end of April. All right, this exploded on the scene not on November 30th when they first made it available, although I was one of the people who jumped on pretty darn quickly, as I typically do because I'm that kind of person. But at most, we're talking 5 months that this stuff has been around at this level, okay? The idea that prompt engineers are going to be the new SEO types and so forth, I think is it's a little early to call that one. And to go with the chicken analogy, we shouldn't count those chickens before they're actually hatched.
No, but also it means if you're looking to start a new career for yourself right now, becoming a professional prompt writer is probably not a bad way to point yourself.
Yeah, except that these are all things that anybody can learn if they actually sit down and use the tools to any amount whatsoever. No. You look at me skeptically, okay?
Look, anyone can write their own SEO search words too. That hasn't stopped people coming along and proclaiming themselves as experts.
No, I agree with you. I agree with you on that. But the fact of the matter is, if you use the tools at all, okay, you'll start to understand that there are ways of asking for things that actually will get you better results. Also, if you start to understand that these things do use natural language, and that's something that people haven't quite wrapped their heads around, because again, we're only 5 months into this, okay? People haven't wrapped their heads around the idea that you can say things, not just, tell me about this or write me a post about this. You can say, write me, or describe this to me, but also contrast it with these ideas and point out some things that I may not have thought about or that people typically don't think about. And that will actually tell the artificial intelligence he's not interested in, in a canned answer. They're looking for something that is, slightly outside the box. Please go ahead.
But that's where I think this opportunity lies, is with the people that will spend all day practicing on asking GPT for stuff, and they will understand the prompts that can extract the maximum benefit. The negative prompts of say, give me this, don't put in this. Mm-hmm. I can see that becomes a talent. Right?
I agree with you, but
it's the reverse of garbage in, garbage out. Genius in, genius out. Right? So
I like that. You should coin that phrase: genius in, genius out. That would
but you know what I mean. What you're going to get out of this is going to be as good as the prompt you put in. And I can see a profession, if not an industry, of people that know how to use the idiosyncrasies of any particular implementation to get the most out of it.
Mm-hmm.
Do you not see that happening? I see that as
Well,
a massive opportunity.
I do. In fact, one of our friends, on the Free Thinker at Large Discord plug, is Nick, who, like, first of all, people have been sharing the AI images that they've been creating there, and I'm moving away from ChatGPT just for a moment here. I want to get back to it, language models specifically, but the AI generation stuff. I don't know if you've noticed, but some of the stuff that people are starting to put on the Discord, there's some like amazing things there. And in fact, Nick in particular has been going a little overboard on it. In fact, um, in fact, I've actually used a couple of the images that he's generated as my new backgrounds for for my computer because they look so damn good. Um, and that's, I mean, that's what he's doing. He's experimenting with it. He's experimenting with the technology, and keep in mind that while there are products that you pay for, okay, a lot of this stuff is free and freely acceptable to you, or freely accessible, not acceptable, accessible to you. And that's part of the excitement. And that's part of what gets me back to, the early days of open source. I didn't have to buy a license. I didn't have to spend 120 bucks or whatever it was for a Windows license. I could install an open source desktop on my PC and save that. Especially if I was, the type of person who just bought like a box and was going to put something on that box. That excitement is back. And there are models that have been first leaked, but also just put out on the internet, like language models, smaller language models that people are tweaking, that they're playing with. Stable Diffusion, Stability.ai, the company behind Stable Diffusion, releases this stuff as open source and provides sites where you can put up, alternative models for creating images. And now, of course, language models as well. Sorry, go ahead. You look like you're trying to say something.
No, but I mean, sorry, before we go too deep down this path, could you possibly help educate me and maybe along with me, our readers, on what the heck is a language model?
Oh, okay.
And what is the massive leap that has taken us from Google Assistant and Bing into what seems to some people overnight being GPT-3 and all the various interfaces? I think there's an awful lot of lack of understanding about what the heck is actually going on, what this great leap in knowledge is, and then later on, I want to get into the whole thing about open source or whatever, and why the company OpenAI is not open in the way you expect. But first, when we get into the little bit of the explain like I'm 5, what the heck is going on?
Okay, well, the biggest difference is lots and lots of data, to oversimplify things. But let me sort of back up on that. The GPT, first of all, the initial stands for Generative Pre-trained Transformer, and the transformer, the T in transformer actually comes from Google. Their BARD, of course, is notoriously absent from most of the world, and and has taken a beating from ChatGPT, as Google has taken. But they're the ones who came up with the T in transformer. Generative means I can create things from data. Pre-trained means I trained this data originally on a huge body of data, and that huge body can basically be all of the text on the internet, or portions of the text that already exists on the internet. And
but that doesn't mean that somebody who puts something into ChatGPT means that it's immediately scanning the entire internet in real time to come back with an answer. Somewhere this has been
not in ChatGPT, because ChatGPT does not access the internet. Its data stops at the end of 2021.
Okay, so that's one thing that's important to understand. It's not going at the internet in real time. There is a blob of data that has been collected somewhere that is now used as the foundation for ChatGPT, right?
Right, except that data is not, as some people imagine, the text itself. Okay, It's sort of like, and let me just give you the T again. The transformer, the transformer in T is that I can take all this, I can mush this stuff up, transform it into something different at the end of it. And I sort of joke about the idea that humans are basically GPT as well. We're generative, we make things. We're pre-trained on all the knowledge that we've picked up in school, that we've picked up while playing with others, driving to and from work, watching television, and so forth. And then we transform all that into new and interesting things. So we're kind of GPT models ourselves. And in some ways, the big breakthrough is that, and this is, again, this is really simplistic at the like I'm five thing. A lot of what I do when I'm talking at this moment, or you do when you're talking, or anybody does, is it's not like we're sitting there analyzing what we're going to say. We're generating this text, we're generating this speech as we go along. Okay, it's all being generated as we go along. And we can do that because we've been pre-trained with years, of, well, not just years, but also, millennia of evolution that has given us all these tools. So we just sort of build up on these tools, large amounts of data. And the more data we have, the more interesting things we're able to say, the more interesting things we're able to create, we're able to write, we're able to paint, if that's where, our interests are. So you've been trained on all this stuff. You don't remember everything verbatim, which is why these systems hallucinate, right? Okay. But if I ask you, when's the Battle of Hastings? When was the Battle of Hastings? Oh, you don't know that.
Something.
1066. Anyway, the point
There
is,
you go.
there are all these little bits of information, these facts, and so forth. But then I could tell you that, well, it was William the Conqueror, and then I would be, and then I might be wrong or something like that, because I don't have all the facts, but I have some of the facts, and I can assemble and I can give you information that's relatively accurate most of the time. But humans routinely make mistakes. We're routinely explaining things, saying things, and inserting falsehoods, not because we're lying, okay, but because we're fallible and we don't have like an exact representation of everything, which is why things like Microsoft's Bing chat accesses the internet and can give you cross references to where it's going. You want to say something? Jump in.
Yeah, but okay, to go back to you asking me about the Battle of Hastings and me getting it wrong. So if I was not put on the spot and I was given like 30 seconds to do that, as you know, I could go to the internet and I could look it up.
Yes.
Right now, but, and here's the problem with going to the internet. I have my own little circle of trusted sources.
Yes.
Right? I could well go to a site that said the Battle of Hastings never happened. And I know how to discern the difference. How does the bot know how to tell the difference? Because there's all sorts of various interpretations, including a lot of different interpretations of what you and I might call factual information. Various sources on the internet will have wildly divergent views from ours. Especially on the issue of, metaphysics and religion and where do things come from. You have wildly different views of things that are presented by both sides as sheer fact. You and I are able to discern, okay, if I go to Wikipedia, I can understand it most of the time with the understanding that occasionally it gets political, blah, blah, blah. You and I can both have our trusted sources, and we probably also know that there's places that we can go to that are highly reliable in giving us unreliable information. How does a bot tell the difference?
In exactly the same way. Okay, it's trained with an understanding that some sources are going to be more reliable than others. The other thing as well.
Now, is it explicitly given that information by its creator? Or does it?
No.
How does it discern what's real and what's not?
No, it's not explicitly. And granted, I do not know all the ins and outs of these systems. Let's be clear about this. But it's not given that information. We assume that for the most part, there are more sources of the right information for some things on the internet, especially if what you're doing is scouring things like encyclopedias, Wikipedia, we'll say reliable sources in quotes here. And if you go out with an understanding that that's the case, you're going to tend to weigh that information as likely more accurate than other information that's sitting out there, right? In fact, in some, like you mentioned SEO, which I think is a plague upon the world. Before SEO, Google's search algorithms were actually excellent because they would weigh the validity of the search results that they give you, not on whether you were plugging in the right terms into some SEO formula or something like that, but how many other places backed up the data, the information, you know, how many other sites would cross-reference that same information. And it was a lot more useful than it is today. A Google search these days, you know, and I mean,
But
sorry,
of course, what corrupted that was money.
yes,
Because when Google's search term was based on that, based on how many people trusted this link versus that link and so on, and the original algorithms were fantastic. But then it came time to monetize that. You couldn't monetize that algorithm. So you had to monetize keywords.
yes.
And Google has made a pretty coin in selling keywords to advertisers. But that immediately opens the door to people prepared to game the system.
No, absolutely, absolutely. But with, I mean, part of the belief, and again, we'll see how this turns out in the long run, but part of the belief is that if you have enough information, you know, you're able to discern where the truth is, because you can say, okay, well, I know these things over here and I know these things over here, and you can't get from here to here, therefore there must be something wrong between these two places. I'm oversimplifying this, I realize,
But
but
also sometimes the masses can be wrong.
no, and it's not simply a case of the masses. It's a case of what makes sense. Okay, I mean, some things are just logical. Okay, some things you can say, okay, I take these facts as true, and if these things are correct, then I can't possibly get to this place. Therefore, there's got to be something wrong with this particular idea over here. And in some ways, that's what science is like. To quote, "There might be giants." You know, a scientific theory isn't just how do they say it? A scientific theory isn't just a hunch or a guess. It's more
Right.
like a question that's been put to a lot of tests. You
Oh,
know,
and yeah, and this happens a lot in arguments between atheists and theists, in the sense that, oh, you know, well, if you believe the theory of gravity is just a guess, then step outside your window and test it.
bingo. But the thing is, the beautiful thing about computers and simulations in computers is you can test those things, right? Without having a whole bunch of theists, you know, falling to their deaths off bridges, right? No jokes. I see your face there. You're just dying to say something.
No. This also extends it. Well, the Big Bang Theory, it's just a theory. It's just a guess.
I know, and that's
So,
and you know, this is one of those places where terminology is our worst enemy. I mean, we have a word which at one time meant something to different people, and the word has changed over time. You know, a scientific theory is not, oh, you know, I theorize that that tree over there will suddenly turn purple in the next 5 minutes. Like, it's not a theory, you know, and it's not likely to happen. So there are criteria to get there. Um, I mean, some of those things are just stupid. It's sort of like a PhD, you know. It's one of those things that I sort of joke about. It's like a doctor of philosophy. Well, philosophy doesn't sound like science, but science is philosophy. Science used to be called philosophy before it was called science, and we have those three initials back from the days when it actually meant something to say I was a doctor of philosophy, as opposed to. Anyway, I digress. Let's go back. Let's go back to these models. So another place where it's actually more, where it's actually easier to understand the idea of correlations. Okay, and remember, we're talking about like massive amounts of computing power here, which is also one of the reasons why this is possible today. That kind of computing power didn't exist 20 years ago, right?
so it's not just the big chunk of data; it's the ability to process through it.
Yes. It is definitely the ability to process it. One of my favorite ones is, you know, the people who argue that the specifically in the case of artists, okay, and just before I get to the artists, I want to talk about the idea that, you know, jobs of different types have been disappearing and replaced often with new things and so forth. But the old jobs have disappeared countless times over the course of, you know, however far back you want to go. Okay. And nobody ever seems to miss those things. It's when those of us who consider ourselves smarter, you know, the writers, the artists, the thinkers of the world, when all of a sudden something is entering into our playing field, now it's a really bad thing. We didn't complain when other people's jobs were disappearing before. It's like, well, that's because, you know, that type of work, well, it was obviously going to get replaced at some point. You know, now we're being now we know what it feels like. And some people are
First they came for the stagecoach drivers, and I did not complain.
First they came for the lamplighters, then they came for the stagecoach drivers. Then they came for the town crier. I don't know.
And now,
and I didn't do anything. Now they've come for the writers and the artists. Oh my God. But art is one of the places where this makes a hell of a lot of sense. Okay. If I study art my whole life and I look at a lot of paintings and I look at people's works and I study the way they did brush strokes and I look at these types of landscape paintings or these types of portrait paintings and so forth. Over the course of time, I'm going to build images in my brain of this is what a landscape looks like. This is what a portrait looks like. This is, you know, this is what a mountainscape looks like and so forth. I'm going to do all of that. And without thinking about it, when I start creating my own works, I'm going to be bringing all of these things into play that I've learned over time. All of the inspiration that I've taken from all of the artists that I've studied, all the paintings I've looked at, all of the advertising, you know, that I see on the pages of magazines. I'm going to take all of that and it's all going to go into the things that I create. With models that create art, for instance, that's exactly what's happened. It's looked at all of those things, okay? And if I were to ask you, if you took all of the pictures that are sitting on the internet, like that are sitting on websites, including artists' works and so forth, how much data do you think all that stuff takes? Is it a couple of gigabytes or is it somewhere in the petabytes?
I was going to be somewhere in the middle and saying it was some amount of terabytes, but I'd probably be wrong.
Oh, you know, many terabytes. Okay, it's a phenomenal amount of data, and yet the model files, the so-called checkpoint files or pickle files that are used for things like stable diffusion, are like 2 and 3 gigabytes in size. You have more images on your PC right now. You know, people have bigger SIM cards in their phones to store images than you can store in a 3 gigabyte file. And yet all of the artwork that an image generator like Stable Diffusion creates, all of that stuff is stored in a 2 or 3 gigabyte file. That's not compression. That type of compression would be black hole level frigging compression. It's because the model has learned what a dog looks like, has learned what. Sorry, go ahead.
With your indulgence, I'd like to kick the whole issue of image-based AI into another episode. We are coming close to an hour of doing this.
Yeah, that's true.
And we haven't gotten out of the philosophy yet. Because one of the things that in prep for this, one of the things I'm hoping we would do, meaning you, would be well, the thing is, you've played with this a lot more than I have. I have dabbled. You have been nose deep into knowing what works, what's good, what's bad. And as much as I usually loathe top 10 lists and their ilk on the internet, I would love to see a situation where you and maybe tiny bit me sort of go into this is what we've tried and this is what works. Because right now there's a ton. You search for GPT interfaces and they're growing exponentially. Right. And so what I was going to suggest was, in our next episode, is to go over the various ways these work. Some are web services, some you load onto your own computer,
Mhm.
some are text chat based, and some are image based. And I'm quite sure that there's going to be, I know already there's some that will create sounds and music based on prompts and things
Oh,
like that.
absolutely, absolutely.
So
Okay, so let me just jump in for a second there and say that what I think is really important is for people to actually play with this stuff, okay? And there are tools out there that are completely free. Like for instance, if you go to chat.openai.com, okay, you can access Chat GPT, and you'll be accessing the 3.5, the GPT 3.5 model, probably the turbo model at this point, which is extremely capable. You don't get to access GPT-4 at the moment unless you subscribe to ChatGPT Plus, which you can do for $20 US a month. And I do. If you find it useful, if it's the sort of thing that you, as you know, to use your words, you're knee deep in. Or I think those are the words you used. Anyway, if you're really deep into that, then you may want to spend the $20 a month. It may well be worthwhile, especially given the fact that you get to play with GPT-4. You're playing with the bleeding edge, and it's always available as well. At least, well, pretty much always available because you get priority. Sorry.
But I would like to spend some time, and I think we can give a significant amount of detail
Mm-hmm.
to, okay, you've got $20 a month to spend, but there's a zillion alternatives out there, each
Yeah.
telling you they're better than the last. Some are completely open source.
Yep.
And in fact, some of them not only are saying, put in the chat of your choice, but also, could you help us out by, embarking in a project that will help us make our system smarter, which is a phenomenal way to contribute to open source without being a coder. I love this, and this takes us back to the beginning of this episode where we talked about bringing the fun and excitement back into open source.
Yes.
And this is where I can see
Okay.
this happening again.
Okay, so
And
I'm going to give, so I know we're running up against the top here, but let me give you homework and let me give everybody some homework then, okay? Okay. Let's go with text models for starters, okay? Like in other words, versions of Chat GPT that you don't actually have to pay for, but that if you want, you can experiment with. You can even load it on your PC, but you don't have to, because these things will provide an interface that you can use online that you can experiment with. One of them is called open-assistant.io, Open Assistant. And it is one of the alternative large language models, not big like a GPT-4, but there's a huge community of people that are involved in it, that are developing it, that are training it, that are experimenting with it. And it's kind of an exciting one to take a look at. Another one is Hugging Faces chat, huggingface.com/chat. And Hugging Face also has a model that you can, and Hugging Face, you asked me about Hugging Face. Hugging Face is a company, yes, but they provide things like APIs and places for developers to put their models and stuff like that. Go ahead.
I think we have enough for a future episode in just talking people through that. I say that because I know I'm looked at this stuff. I love it. As I told you yesterday, I had a look at the Open Assistant dashboard. It can be intimidating. I think we may have a role to play in actually talking people through this. And again, how do you get the most out of it? Even if we can give a little guidance in how to write a good prompt. So
You
you're
know,
not.
you don't even have to start there. You can sit down and say, write me a poem about birds on a windy day.
Okay,
Like,
but again, that's what a lot of people are doing. I
yeah.
want to explore with you, because you're probably in a better position to answer this than most. How do you take this out of the realm of, I won't say the trivial, but I will say the mundane, and put it into the stuff? So, well, for instance, and I won't go into this in depth, a lot of the image-based AI to me just looks like science fiction book covers. But the issue is,
Yep.
we know the potential is beyond that.
Yes.
We know the potential is beyond, express the U.S. Bill of Rights as a haiku. right? We know that we can take it past that kind of thing. And
Yeah.
how do you see, and how can we, both we and anyone listening, how can we take this beyond that stuff into things that will actually make us better and potentially even make the people around us and potentially even society better? I absolutely buy into your premise that this is going to be a net benefit. Let's start thinking about the paths we can take of how to get there. Right now, it's just in toy territory, right?
Yeah.
People are playing with it and creating verbal and literary toys. How do we take that out of the toys and into something useful and practical? And I think we have an entire episode just for that.
All right. Well, in that case, then, since we're going to wrap it up here, and I know we're up at the top of the hour here. Since we're going to wrap it up, let me finish it by saying that, play is a child's work. Okay, this is the job of children, and with a lot of this stuff, we are all children. So, I think what I want to leave people with today is, I want you to play. Like, I want you, like, I realize that it sounds like mundane, it sounds like silly stuff, but don't try to come up with a cure for cancer today. Like, there are people who are working on this at the moment. The average person who is just getting into this, who's wondering how to get into this, just have fun with it. Go to one of the 3 sites I gave you there, for instance, and just put in prompts. Try some of these stupid, silly things, these inconsequential things, and just get a feel for how it works, get a feel for what it does, and don't pretend that you're going to solve any big problems today. Just play. Be a kid. Is that a good place to leave it?
Sure is. Let's have fun with our new toys.
All right. Well, listen, it's been fun.
But we will need a continuation.
We're going to continue this.
We knew before we started this was more than one episode.
We have to change the name of the podcast to, I don't know, TEK TEE, like TAI. Get it? Bye, Evan.
Bye, Marcel. Good luck thinking a new name.
Hi, this is Marcel after the show. If you like what Evan and I are doing here, there are many ways that you can help support the podcast. The most important and easiest of them all is just to tell your friends, family, dog, cat, goldfish, enemies. Just tell everybody about the podcast and have them listen as well. You can also review it on Anchor.fm or Apple Podcasts or wherever it is that you happen to listen to podcasts. If you have a blog, you can blog about it. If you have your own podcast, hey, that would be cool. If you have your own podcast, you could actually talk about our podcast in your podcast. If you're going to do that, by the way, you should let us know because, hey, we'd like to listen too. We'll talk to you later. Bye-bye.